Okay, so let's work through the steps that it takes to enable the client-side monitoring component of AVIcode, or what we call AVIcode UX. That's a user health monitoring that allows me to monitor some of the timing in JavaScript directly inside of an HTML page that goes out. The way that that happens is the server-side agent will actually do some JavaScript injection for us. So essentially that means that I need to be monitoring from the server side first before I can do the client side's perspective. So in that case, I'm going to go ahead and open up the management console snap-in for the server and enable the server side part of the application I want to monitor. And I'm going to go to All Programs, Intercept Studio, and there I'll find the Intercept Management Console, which is the utility we use to make these changes. At this point, I have nothing being monitored, nothing enabled. I'm going to go ahead and add a web application by right-clicking on Web Applications. And I'm going to allow it to select a specific web application, in this case the DinnerNow user interface that I want to monitor for my application. I'm not going to go through a lot of detail around what are some of the settings for server side, mostly because I want to get to how do we do the client side, and this is just the steps I need to take. But essentially these are just the alerting levels in the depth of how I want to collect data on the server side. So I'm going to go ahead and set that. It's now asking me if I want to restart IIS so that I can put the hooks that I need into the application as the next time that it starts, and that would set my alerting levels and my sensitivity levels. I now see DinnerNow listed. I see that it's in operational monitoring mode, which means I should start monitoring the application and collecting data. So I'll run a quick test inside the application, knowing that this is going to be the first time it's going to spin up the worker process for me, and it's going to do a few things. I know that this is going to be slow, and this should allow me to at least test and confirm that my server-side monitoring is enabled. Obviously, like I said earlier, that's one of the requirements before we can enable UX monitoring, is to enable exactly what we're going to collect on the server side. So right now it's completed that search. I'm going to go back into the AVIcode Intercept Studio, refresh that screen, and hope that I see some events. And we have a number of events that have populated the screen. So just to confirm that I have what I needed, I can see the registration, I can see the search and the categories that are gone through. So all happening at this time. So now I need to actually open up the management console for UX monitoring and configuration. So first I'm going to close the console that I had open for the server side. And I'm going to go back to my start menu, all programs. I'm going to go into the AVIcode Intercept Studio. But here I'm going to go one level deeper. It's Intercept configuration folder. And you can see that there is a UX management console, along with several other files. So I'm now going to open up the management console, and I'm going to make some configuration changes. First thing that I'm going to do is add the application that I want to monitor. Here you can see that I have DinnerNow listed, along with a couple of other applications that I've configured on the server side. These are listed because they are monitored by the server. So you have to individually add them on the server side like we did a second ago for DinnerNow. I'm going to select it. It's asking me if it can recycle that. I'm going to go ahead and let it do that. And then it's asking me if it can do a quick scan of the app. In the process of the scan, it's testing for some known issues that injecting JavaScript may cause. And in this particular case, I do get a warning that says one of the master pages has some type of a potential challenge. I know that in DinnerNow I don't have those real challenges, but if I were doing this to a production application that I didn't understand, I might want to resolve that issue by clicking the resolve. And in this case, at the lower level, it would create a filter preventing this part of the application from getting JavaScript. In this case, that would be the whole application because that's where the master page is used. I'm okay with this one. I'm not going to actually do any resolutions there because I do want to monitor it. It's giving me another warning saying, are you sure? Or do you want to just disable? I'm going to go ahead and say yes, close that. I am sure. So now there's a couple of other things that I need to do before we actually will gather data. First of all, I want to set the depth of data that I want to collect at the upper level. So I right-click on Web Applications, and I'm going to select Performance Settings and make sure that these are what I need. I'll leave these defaulted because I'll change them at the lower level. But the depth of information, including images and size of script files and style sheets, weren't by default enabled. I'm going to go ahead and check those off because I want that information to be collected as part of an event. Another challenge that I have is at the higher level, the filters are enabling for browsers or at least disabling for certain types of requests. As an example, I don't want to monitor non-supported web pages. So if I go here, I can see that I'm disabling things that aren't ASPX and aren't MVC style apps. So what I need to do is enable Internet Explorer 9, since by default 5.7 version of AVIcode does not have that enabled. Now I go into supported browsers by clicking on supported browsers and then clicking the edit button, and I can see that Internet Explorer 7 and Firefox and Internet Explorer 8, which is called Trident 4, are all being monitored. What I want to do is add the filter for Internet Explorer 9. So I'll do edit filter, I'll do add filter. I want to add a request header. And what I'm doing is looking at what information's coming in through the request header, and in particular, I want to make a comparison of the variable or the argument user agent. What I want to say is when user agent variable doesn't include the information regarding Trident 5.0, which is the Internet Explorer's user agent stamp, I want to go ahead and inject it. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. You see it's now listed. That means Internet Explorer 7, 8, and 9 are now all going to get the JavaScript injection at the higher level. Go ahead and save that setting, and I'll apply that where I'm at now. I'm not going to describe any of these other tabs and depth since they're more advanced configurations. I'm really working through, at least at a minimum, just collecting events. At this point, it says that I'm able to monitor. I'm enabled for dinner now, but there is one gotcha that we need to be concerned about. By default, we are preventing the injection from happening in any web application that you add unless you manually go in and remove a specific filter. And that's by design. We want to make sure that that happens so that you are the last one or the known one to go in and test it and then remove that. So if I right-click on the Dinner Now component and I select Properties, I'm going to actually do a couple of things here in advance of removing the filter. I'm going to go ahead and set my sensitivity level and my alerting level a little bit lower than the default. Essentially what this is saying is when the page is longer than 2 seconds to collect it, and when there's information longer than 100 milliseconds to include it, and when there's AJAX request back to WCF services longer than 500 milliseconds to collect that as well. Now, what I want to do is go to my filters, and on my filters, you'll see the initial ones that were set up at the higher level, server level in gray, and then some additional ones added to this application. These might be, for example, pages that had an issue that I selected resolve the issue, or they might be the IP address filter, which is that precautionary filter we add to every app. Now, normally, best practice would be to open the filter up, to modify the filter in such a way to where it would allow me to do the local IPs for my network so I can test it, or even the local host or something like that. But since I already know that this is a known application that I've monitored before, and if you're doing this in a test environment, you can do the same, just simply remove that filter. because that filter was preventing JavaScript from going into any request with any IP address. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, apply those settings, and select OK. So now monitoring is enabled on the client side. I'll close the management console, I'll go back to the Dinner Now application, and I'll refresh the screen just by asking it to show me back to the default page. Normal testing process, you'll just browse one of the pages that is a .NET component of the application, and then once we pull that component up, we'll go ahead and right-click on that page in a blank area and view the source of the page. And the hopes are that I'll see a kind of large obfuscated set of JavaScript functions, just like this, at the very beginning of the page. To confirm that it is the AVIcode client-side monitoring, I'm going to look for something in that stream that says CSM collector. So that's essentially saying that monitoring is in the application. One little gotcha that I didn't talk about, which is worth mentioning, is you do have to install a collector someplace. The collector typically would install underneath the application you want to monitor. I've already had that here, but to install a collector, you simply would go to the All Programs, AVIcode Intercept Studio, and under the Intercept configuration, you'll see UX Collector Configuration Utility. And here you can see that it's already installed on the default website, which is where Dinner Now is, and there is another website that I could choose to put the collector if I wanted to. That's all you would do to install the collector after running the MSI, or configuring the collector after running the MSI for the collector. It's required since this collector is how we get information. This web service is what listens to the browsers when they communicate back. So now that I know that I've got that information, let me do a real quick secondary test just to see if I'm collecting client-side data and it's making it back to the collector. And once I get the request completed, I'm going to go ahead and bring up my structured event viewer, my list of events in AVIcode, and see what I've gotten in the listing. And the hopes are that I'll see some that are tagged with that Dinner Now name, since that's the application name, and then client appended to the end of the name saying that this is the client-side monitoring component. So if I click on one of these client-side monitoring components, it looks a little bit different than a normal performance event from AVIcode, because this is the document object model's representation of time, how we can pull that from the DOM. So it looks like everything's configured. We were able to quickly get it up and running, went over our little 10-minute time period, but at least we've got it there. Thank you very much.